I never imagined that my life would take such a devastating turn. Just a year ago, I was full of life, with dreams and plans stretching out before me. I had a wonderful husband, 2 beautiful daughters, and a small bakery that was finally starting to take off in our local neighborhood. Every day was filled with flour, laughter, and the sweet smell of pastries. It seemed like nothing could go wrong, until the day the doctors told me I had cancer. Not just any cancer, but an aggressive, terminal one. The kind that leaves no room for hope. I sat in the sterile room, the coldness of the chair under me matching the icy fear that crept through my veins. How could this be happening to me? From that moment on, everything fell apart. The bakery closed. I no longer had the strength to keep it running. My daughters, who once clung to me with joy and love, started to look at me with sad eyes, as if they knew I was slipping away from them. My husband, Marcos, tried his best to be strong, but I could see the cracks forming in his facade. Late at night, when he thought I was asleep, I could hear him crying in the bathroom, the sound of his pain reverberating through the thin walls of our small house. I was drowning in fear and despair, with no way out. I went through treatment after treatment, but each one felt like torture. The chemotherapy burned through my veins, and my body, once so full of life, became a shell of what it once was. My hair fell out, my skin turned pale, and I could barely stand to look at myself in the mirror. I lost faith in everything, even in God. If there was a God, how could he let me suffer like this? What kind of mercy was this, where I had to watch my children lose their mother piece by piece? I stopped praying. I stopped believing. I became a shadow of the woman I once was, trapped in a body that no longer felt like mine. It wasn't long before I hit rock bottom. One evening, after another grueling session of chemo, I locked myself in the bathroom. The pain was unbearable, not just the physical pain, but the crushing weight of hopelessness. I stared at the small, worn cross hanging on the bathroom wall, a relic from my childhood that I had carried with me all these years. I screamed at it, demanding answers, demanding to know why I had been abandoned. "Where are you?" I shouted, my voice breaking as tears streamed down my face. "Where are you when I need you most?" But there was only silence. The days blurred together after my outburst in the bathroom. Every morning, I woke up with a heavy heart, knowing the battle I was fighting was one I could not win. My body had become my enemy, and no amount of medicine or treatment seemed to help. My daughters, Clara and Sophia, no longer smiled the way they used to, their innocent joy replaced by fear and uncertainty. Every time they looked at me, it was as if they were waiting for me to disappear. I couldn't bear it anymore. Even Marcos, my rock, had begun to distance himself. Our once strong bond felt fragile, as though the weight of my illness was too much for him to carry. One morning, I overheard Marcos talking to his mother on the phone. He didn't know I was listening, but his words cut deeper than any knife. "I don't know how much more of this I can take," he whispered, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "I've prayed, I've begged God to heal her, but nothing is happening. Maybe it's just her time." The tears stung my eyes, but I stayed silent, pressing my ear against the cold wooden door. My heart shattered in a way I didn't think was possible. If even Marcos was losing hope, then what chance did I have? That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I lay in the darkness, consumed by my thoughts. I hadn't prayed in weeks, maybe even months. What was the point? God had turned his back on me. But something inside me stirred, a tiny flicker, like a candle barely holding on to its flame. As much as I wanted to ignore it, it wouldn't go away. So, I forced myself out of bed, my frail body trembling with every step, and knelt down on the cold, hard floor. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I tried to pray. God, I whispered, my voice barely audible, if you're still there, please, show me a sign. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The silence that followed was deafening. I waited, expecting some miraculous answer, but there was nothing. Just the steady hum of the night. I clenched my fists, feeling the anger rise in my chest. Is this what you want? For me to suffer? For my family to watch me waste away? My voice broke, and the tears came again, hot and uncontrollable. I was at my lowest point, broken in every sense of the word. I didn't know how much longer I could endure this pain. The next morning, something strange happened. I woke up to the sound of birds singing outside my window. It was the first time in weeks that I noticed them. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over my bed. For a brief moment, I felt peaceful. I couldn't explain it. The pain was still there, but something had shifted inside me. It wasn't much, just a tiny sliver of hope. But it was enough to make me get out of bed, to face another day. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something. Something I couldn't quite understand yet, but something that felt bigger than me. I spent the day in silence, reflecting on the prayer I had whispered the night before. Was it possible that God had heard me? Could this small flicker of hope be his answer? I didn't know, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a strange pull towards faith. The nights were the hardest. As the darkness crept into the house, so did my fear. I would lie awake, listening to the soft breathing of my daughters in their rooms, the quiet hum of the house, and my own thoughts spinning wildly out of control. I could feel the weight of time pressing down on me, like a ticking clock counting down the days I had left. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside felt like a reminder of what I was about to lose. Marco started sleeping on the couch more often, and though he didn't say it, I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. The stress was eating away at him, the fear of what was coming, the reality of our situation gnawing at his soul. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay. But I didn't have the strength. Instead, we lived in this uncomfortable silence, pretending that things weren't falling apart around us. One evening, after putting the girls to bed, I wandered into the kitchen and found him standing by the sink, staring out the window at the night sky. His back was turned to me, his shoulders tense, and I knew something was brewing inside him. The air felt thick, charged with something unsaid. I hesitated before speaking, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcos, we need to talk. He didn't turn around at first, just kept staring out the window as if hoping that if he stayed quiet enough, the moment would pass. But then, slowly, he turned to face me, and I saw the pain etched across his face, the anger simmering beneath the surface. What's there to talk about, Elena? He finally said, his voice raw. You're dying. That's it, isn't it? What's left to say? His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had known he was struggling, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way I hadn't been ready for. I swallowed hard, trying to keep the tears at bay. I don't know how to do this, I whispered, my voice trembling. I don't know how to say goodbye. To you, to the girls. I'm terrified, Marcos. For a moment, the wall between us seemed to crack. He stepped toward me, his eyes softening with something like regret. I'm scared too, he admitted, his voice breaking. But I don't know how to be here for you. I don't know how to watch you slip away. We stood there in the kitchen, two broken people, too afraid to lean on each other for fear of crumbling completely. I wanted to tell him that I understood, that I felt the same crushing helplessness. But the words got stuck in my throat. Instead, We stood there in silence, the unspoken grief hanging in the air between us, thicker than the night outside. In the days that followed, things seemed to spiral further. The girls, sensing the growing tension, became quieter, their usual playful energy replaced by cautious glances and whispered conversations. Sophia, who was always so full of life, now watched me with wide, anxious eyes, as if she was waiting for something bad to happen. Clara, still too young to fully understand, clung to my side constantly, her little hand always reaching for mine as if she feared I would disappear if she let go. The worst part was that I didn't have the answers they needed. When Sophia asked if I was going to get better, I could only smile and say, "We'll see, sweetheart," even though I knew the truth. I hated lying to her, but what choice did I have? I couldn't burden her with the reality of what was happening. Then, one afternoon, as I was resting in bed, I overheard Sophia talking to Clara in the hallway. "Do you think Mom's going to die?" Sophia whispered, her voice thick with fear. I felt my heart stop, my breath catching in my throat. Clara, in her innocence, simply said, "No, Mommy will be okay. She has to be." But Sophia wasn't convinced. "But what if she's not? What will we do, Clara? What will happen to us?" I wanted to jump out of bed, to run to them and tell them everything would be all right, but my body felt like lead. I was trapped in this nightmare, powerless to protect my daughters from the truth that was closing in on us all. Tears slid down my face as I listened to them, my chest aching with the weight of it all. How had things gotten so bad? How had I let this happen? And yet, despite the chaos, the unanswered prayers, the ticking clock, something in me still clung to hope. I didn't know if it was desperation or blind faith, but I refused to believe this was the end. I had to keep fighting, for Marcos, for my girls, for myself. But deep down, I knew that even hope had its limits. The days stretched on, each one a painful reminder of the life I was slowly losing. And still, no miracle came. Each prayer felt emptier than the last, and though I still whispered them in the quiet of the night, I began to wonder if anyone was listening at all. The tension between Marcos and me grew thicker with each passing moment, like a storm cloud hanging over our home, waiting to break. I could see it in the way he avoided my gaze, in the way he stayed at work longer than he needed to. He was slipping away, just like I was. And I was too tired to stop it. But as much as I wanted to, I couldn't let go, not yet. There was still a part of me, small as it was, that believed in the possibility of something greater. Maybe the miracle wasn't in healing my body, but in healing the brokenness inside all of us. Maybe there was still a way out of this darkness. Or maybe, I was simply running out of time. As the days blended into weeks, the walls of our home began to feel like they were closing in. The tension between Marcos and me was palpable, hanging in the air like a thick fog we couldn't escape. Every conversation we had seemed to circle the same unspoken fear, and every silent moment between us only made the distance grow wider. One evening, as the sky outside darkened, I found Marcos sitting alone at the dining table, his hands clasped tightly together as if he were holding something in. His face was shadowed, his eyes cast downward. I could feel the weight of his thoughts pressing on him, heavy and unresolved. I approached slowly, my footsteps soft against the floor. "Marcos," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of everything unsaid between us. He didn't look up at first, but when he did, the rawness in his expression caught me off guard. His eyes were tired, bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days. "We can't keep doing this," he finally said, his voice thick with frustration and something else, something darker. "We can't just keep pretending that everything is going to be okay when we both know it's not." His words cut deep, but they weren't a surprise. I had felt it too, the futility of holding on, the slow, inevitable unraveling of everything we had built together. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that I wasn't prepared for. My heart clenched painfully, and I struggled to find my voice. "I'm still here, Marcos," I said, my throat tight with emotion. "I'm still fighting." He shook his head, his hands balling into fists on the table. Are you really?" His voice broke, and for the first time in months, I saw him crack open. "Because it feels like you're already gone, Elena. And I don't know how to handle that." Silence fell between us, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to reach out to him, to tell him that I understood, that I felt the same fear gnawing at me day and night. But I was trapped in my own helplessness, my own fear of the unknown. The words I needed to say just wouldn't come. The door creaked open suddenly, and Sophia stepped into the room, her small figure framed in the doorway. Her eyes flickered between us, wide and anxious, sensing the tension even if she didn't fully understand it. "Mom? Dad?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "Why are you fighting?" Marcos quickly wiped at his eyes, trying to compose himself, but the damage had already been done. Sophia had seen too much, more than any child should. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile onto my face as I gestured for her to come closer. "We're not fighting, sweetheart," I said softly, though the lie tasted bitter on my tongue. "Just talking." But Sophia wasn't convinced. She stood there, her brow furrowed, her little hands twisting nervously at the hem of her nightgown. "Is it because you're sick, Mom?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hit me like a freight train, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. How could I explain this to her? How could I tell my little girl that I was slowly slipping away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it? Marco stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Come on, Sophia," he said, his voice strained. "It's time for bed." But Sophia didn't move. She just stood there, staring at me with those wide, innocent eyes, waiting for an answer I wasn't sure I could give. I could feel the tears welling up behind my eyes, threatening to spill over. I wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that she didn't need to worry, but that wasn't the truth. And I had lied to her for long enough. Before I could say anything, Marco scooped Sophia up in his arms, his movements a little too abrupt, a little too forceful. "Let's go," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sophia's eyes lingered on mine as Marcos carried her down the hallway, and I could see the fear in them, the confusion. Once they were gone, I collapsed into the nearest chair, my body trembling with the effort of holding myself together. The weight of everything, the sickness, the fear, the strain on my family, felt unbearable. I had tried to stay strong, to keep believing that things would turn around, that a miracle would come. But now, in the quiet of the house, all I could feel was the crushing reality of my situation. I pressed my hands to my face, letting the tears fall freely for the first time in days. I had prayed for strength, for healing, for some kind of sign that God hadn't abandoned us in this storm. But the silence was deafening. It was in that moment, as I sat alone in the darkened kitchen, that a wave of guilt washed over me. I had been so consumed by my own fear, my own battle, that I hadn't seen what it was doing to the people I loved most. Marcos, Sophia, Clara, they were all suffering too, each of them fighting their own battles in the shadow of mine. But even as I recognized it, I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to hold on to the pieces of my life that were slipping through my fingers. I didn't know how to be a wife, a mother, and a patient all at once. The house was quiet now, the only sound the distant hum of the fridge and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, shaky breath. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if I would even have the strength to face it. But for now, in this moment, all I could do was pray. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was thick with tension. Marcos had left early, avoiding me completely, and I could feel the echo of our unresolved argument lingering in the air. His absence felt louder than his presence, and it cut deep into the fragile peace I was trying to hold on to. I wandered into the kitchen, feeling the hollowness of the space without his usual clatter of dishes or the hum of morning conversation. Sophia was already seated at the table, quietly drawing in one of her notebooks. I watched her for a moment, noting the concentration on her face, the way she furrowed her brow in thought. She seemed so small, so innocent, yet the weight of what was happening in our home was pressing down on her too. The dark circles under her eyes told me she hadn't slept well either. I moved to sit across from her, the wooden chair creaking under my weight. "What are you drawing, sweetie?" I asked, my voice softer than usual, afraid of shattering the fragile calm between us. She lifted her eyes to meet mine briefly before returning her gaze to the paper. "It's you, Mom," she said quietly, pointing to a figure she'd sketched. The figure stood under a bright sun, surrounded by flowers, smiling brightly as if nothing in the world could hurt her. My heart clenched at the sight. It was the version of me Sophia wished for, the healthy, carefree mother I hadn't been in so long. "It's beautiful," I managed, forcing a smile, even as a lump formed in my throat. "You always draw so well." Sophia didn't say anything more, just continued adding details to her drawing. But her silence spoke louder than words. She was struggling, maybe even more than Marcos or I, and it hit me that I hadn't really seen her through this. I hadn't really been there for her. I had been too lost in my own pain, my own fear. I reached across the table and placed my hand gently over hers. She looked up, startled by the touch. "Sophia," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm sorry if I've made things hard for you. I know you're scared, and I want you to know. I'm scared too." Her wide eyes filled with tears, and in an instant, she was out of her chair, throwing herself into my arms. "I don't want you to go, Mom," she whispered, her small body trembling against mine. "I don't want you to be sick anymore." I held her tightly, feeling her heartbreak in every tear that soaked my shirt. I wanted to promise her that everything would be fine, that I wasn't going anywhere, but I couldn't. The words stuck in my throat, because deep down, I didn't know if that was true. The door creaked open, and Clara stepped in, her backpack slung over one shoulder, the look on her face a mix of exhaustion and frustration. She paused when she saw us, her eyes narrowing in on Sophia, then flicking toward me. "We're late," Clara muttered, her voice clipped, as if the scene unfolding before her was just another inconvenience in her already difficult life. She glanced at her watch, barely concealing her impatience. I sighed, gently pulling away from Sophia, though my heart ached at the loss of her closeness. "Clara, we can talk about this later," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I know things have been." "What's there to talk about, Mom?" Clara snapped, cutting me off before I could finish. "You're sick. Dad's acting like he doesn't care anymore. And I'm stuck picking up the pieces. But sure, let's talk later." Her words stung, each one landing with the force of a blow I wasn't prepared to take. I opened my mouth to respond, but Clara was already halfway out the door, her footsteps heavy with anger and frustration. The door slammed behind her, leaving the kitchen silent once again. My chest tightened, and I found myself gasping for air, the weight of everything crushing down on me. How had we gotten here? How had my illness become the wrecking ball that was destroying our family? I felt Sophia's small hand slip into mine, anchoring me back to the moment. "Don't cry, Mom," she whispered, her voice soft and full of worry. "Please don't cry." But I couldn't stop the tears this time. They spilled over, hot and fast, as the reality of everything hit me like a tidal wave. My family was falling apart, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fix it. I couldn't stop the sickness, couldn't mend the broken pieces of our lives. I had always believed in miracles, always clung to the hope that God would see us through the worst of it. But now, in the darkest moments, I felt abandoned. I prayed, but the answers didn't come. I cried out, but the silence was deafening. I pulled Sophia close, holding her tightly as if she were the only thing keeping me from drowning. But even as I held her, the fear crept in. What if the miracle didn't come? What if I couldn't be the mother she needed, the wife Marcos needed, the woman I needed to be? And as I sat there, lost in a swirl of doubt and fear, a terrifying thought crossed my mind. What if this was it? What if this was the beginning of the end? The weight of the morning lingered heavily as the day dragged on. I found myself pacing the house, unable to shake the gnawing feeling of helplessness that gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. Marcos still hadn't come home, and the silence between us felt like a chasm that was widening with every passing hour. Clara had stormed off to school, and Sophia was quietly occupying herself, but her distant eyes betrayed her true emotions. I glanced at the clock, feeling time slip away as I realized I hadn't eaten. My stomach growled, but I couldn't bring myself to move toward the kitchen. Everything felt meaningless in the face of the storm that was brewing inside our family. How had things unraveled so quickly? My phone buzzed, jolting me out of my spiraling thoughts. It was a message from the hospital, reminding me of my upcoming tests. Another round of appointments, another day of waiting for news that might never bring hope. I stared at the message for a long moment, my chest tightening again. The fear I had been pushing aside surged back, stronger than ever. What if this time was different? What if the results were worse than I imagined? I had been clinging to the sliver of hope that maybe the doctors were wrong, that this sickness wasn't as bad as it seemed. But the truth was undeniable. I wasn't getting better. I was getting weaker, and the cracks in our family were widening with every passing day. Sighing, I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer, my voice barely audible. God, I need you now more than ever. Please, don't let this be the end. Don't let my family fall apart because of me. But as I opened my eyes, the same suffocating silence remained. There was no miraculous sign, no rush of peace washing over me like I had always hoped for in moments like these. Just the same heavy uncertainty that had settled in like a shadow over my life. I felt the walls closing in, the weight of the unresolved tension pressing harder against my chest. Marcos wasn't answering his phone, and Clara's frustration was bubbling dangerously close to the surface. Sophia, sweet Sophia, was holding on so tightly to the illusion that everything was okay, but I could see her slipping away into the cracks that were spreading throughout our home. By the time the late afternoon sun cast its orange glow through the windows, I had worked myself into a restless panic. I couldn't sit still, and the house felt too quiet, too empty. I decided to leave, to do something, anything, that would distract me from the chaos that was threatening to consume me. Maybe a walk would clear my mind, give me a moment of clarity. But as I reached for my coat by the door, the sound of footsteps behind me froze me in place. Clara stood there, her arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Her expression was a mix of exhaustion and anger, the lines of resentment clear on her young face. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice sharp and accusatory. "I just need some air," I replied softly, not wanting to add fuel to the fire. Clara rolled her eyes, stepping closer. "So you're just going to leave again?" You do this every time things get hard, Mom. You just run away. Her words hit me like a slap in the face, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Clara, that's not. Yes, it is, she snapped, cutting me off. You always do this. You act like everything's fine, but it's not. Dad is barely around anymore, Sophia is too scared to say anything, and I'm stuck dealing with it all. And now you're just going to leave again, like that's going to fix anything. Tears welled in my eyes as I tried to find the words to explain, but nothing came. I couldn't deny what she was saying. She wasn't wrong. I had been avoiding the reality of our situation, hoping that by pretending to be strong, everything would somehow fall back into place. But the truth was, I was terrified. Terrified of facing the possibility that our family was crumbling because of me. I'm not running away, Clara, I whispered, my voice shaky. I'm just trying to. To what? She shot back, her voice rising. To ignore the fact that everything is falling apart. You're sick, Mom. And you're acting like we can just keep pretending everything's okay when it's not. The room felt smaller with every word she spoke, her frustration hanging in the air between us. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Clara's eyes filled with tears. She wiped them away quickly, her hands trembling. I can't do this anymore, she whispered, her voice breaking. I can't keep pretending that I'm okay. That we're okay. Because we're not. And I'm scared too, Mom. I'm scared that we're losing you. The raw emotion in her voice broke me in a way I hadn't expected. I reached out to touch her arm, but she stepped back, her eyes full of hurt. I need you to stop pretending, she said quietly. I need you to be honest with me. Her words hung in the air as she turned and left the room, leaving me standing there, shaken to my core. I sank into the nearest chair, my body trembling from the weight of everything I had been holding inside. I couldn't fix this, not on my own. But for the first time, I realized that maybe I had been trying to hold on to something that was already slipping through my fingers. My family was hurting, and I had been too afraid to face it. As the shadows lengthened outside, I stared out the window, my heart heavy with the realization that there were no easy answers, no quick fixes. The road ahead felt darker and more uncertain than ever, and I was left to wonder if I was strong enough to face it. The days that followed felt like an eternity. My body weakened as the treatments continued to fail, but the pain in my heart was more unbearable than the physical suffering. Eva's absence haunted me. Every corner of the house reminded me of her, and every moment alone amplified the growing emptiness inside. I could hear her voice echoing in the silent halls, but it was just my mind playing cruel tricks. I would sit by the phone, hoping, praying she would call, that she would come back to see me, even if just one last time. The walls seemed to close in on me, suffocating me with memories of a life that was slipping away faster than I could hold on to it. It was during one of these dark, quiet nights that I found myself on my knees in the living room, tears streaming down my face. I had nothing left to give, no strength to fight. All the prayers I had whispered, all the hopes I had clung to seemed in vain. God, where are you? I cried out, my voice breaking in the stillness. Have you abandoned me, too? What do I have left to believe in if even my faith seems to be fading away? My chest tightened with the weight of despair, and for the first time in years, I felt utterly alone. There was no reply, no sign, only the suffocating silence. The next morning, I was weaker than ever. Even getting out of bed felt like an impossible task. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the crushing weight of hopelessness. The doctors said it was only a matter of time now, but they didn't know how much time that was. Days? Weeks? My mind couldn't process it, and I didn't want to. My only wish was to see Eva again, to feel her hand in mine and tell her I loved her, no matter what had happened between us. But the bitterness between us, the arguments, the hurtful words, seemed like an impenetrable wall. How could I reach her? How could I make her understand before it was too late? Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I received another blow. Sarah, my closest friend, and the only one who had stayed by my side through it all, called me with news that made my blood run cold. She was moving to another state for work, effective immediately. "Clara, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking on the other end of the line. "I didn't want to leave you like this, but it's an opportunity one can't pass up. I'll try to come visit when I can, but I don't know how soon that will be." Her words cut through me like a knife. I didn't blame her, she had her own life to live, but the realization that I was losing another person close to me hit me hard. "It's okay, Sarah," I managed to whisper, though my heart felt like it was shattering into pieces. After we hung up, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling again, wondering how much more I could bear. Every relationship I had seemed to be slipping away. First Eva, now Sarah. It felt like God was stripping away every support, every comfort I had, leaving me utterly exposed to the cruel reality of my situation. Days blurred into nights, and my strength continued to fade. I stopped counting how many days had passed since Eva last called. I didn't have the energy to wait by the phone anymore. Instead, I sank deeper into myself, into the darkness that seemed to wrap itself around me. There were moments I questioned whether God was even real, whether all the prayers, all the years of faith, had been nothing but a lie. And yet, despite everything, there was a small, faint spark of something left inside me. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was more like a question, a quiet whisper asking, could this really be it? Is this how it all ends? But the answer didn't come, not yet. As the days grew darker and my strength all but vanished, I felt myself teetering on the edge of surrender. The constant battle between hope and despair weighed heavily on me. My body, frail and worn, felt like it could no longer carry the burdens of this life. I was ready to let go, ready to give in to the silence that called me. But in the quiet of that cold night, something stirred in my heart, a warmth that I hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. It was a Saturday, the same day of the week when Eva and I would walk by the river, back when we were still speaking, still holding on to each other despite our struggles. I hadn't left the house in days, but something inside me, something small yet unbreakable, urged me to get up. With great difficulty, I rose from my bed, pulled on a coat, and made my way to the park. The cool air kissed my face as I slowly walked along the familiar path. Every step felt like a step into the past, a step toward something I couldn't fully understand yet. As I reached the riverbank, I sank onto the bench we had always sat on together. My heart ached with memories of laughter, arguments, moments of love, and moments of hurt. I bowed my head, and for the first time in weeks, I found myself whispering a prayer. God, I don't know where I went wrong. I don't know if there's still hope for me. But if you're still there, if you're still listening, I need a sign. I need to believe again. Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time in a long while, they didn't feel like tears of despair. It was as if something inside me was being cleansed, something old and worn was being washed away. I stayed on that bench for what felt like hours, lost in the memories of what had been and the quiet hope of what could still be. And then, like a miracle, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and there she was, Eva, standing a few feet away. Her eyes were red, her face tear-streaked, but there was something in her expression that I hadn't seen in so long, softness, vulnerability, and love. "I'm sorry, Clara," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. I was so angry, so hurt, but I couldn't stay away. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you without making things right. I stared at her, my heart pounding. It felt surreal, like a dream I was afraid to wake up from. Eva, I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. I've missed you. I never stopped loving you. Eva rushed to my side and took my hand in hers, tears falling freely from both of our eyes. We sat together on that bench, neither of us needing to say much more. The pain, the heartache, all the misunderstandings that had come between us seemed to dissolve in the light of that moment, in the connection we still shared. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was enough. I prayed for this, I confessed, squeezing her hand tightly. I thought I had lost you forever. You didn't lose me, Eva replied softly. We just lost our way. But we're here now. We still have time. The words hung in the air between us like a promise, one I hadn't dared to hope for until now. There was still time. Time to mend, time to heal, time to love again. In the weeks that followed, my health didn't miraculously recover. The treatments continued, and my body remained fragile, but something else had changed. I wasn't alone anymore. Eva stayed by my side, and our bond grew stronger than it had ever been. We spent hours talking, laughing, and, most importantly, forgiving. We spoke about the future, not with dread but with hope. And in the quiet moments, when the pain became too much to bear, Eva would hold me, whispering words of comfort and faith. I had found my way back to God, not in a grand miracle but in the simple, profound miracle of love, forgiveness, and reconnection. The final days weren't filled with fear, but with peace. Surrounded by those I loved, including Sarah, who managed to visit despite her move, I felt the warmth of their presence and the presence of something far greater than myself. Eva held my hand, and as I closed my eyes for the last time, I knew that all was well. The prayers I had whispered, the faith I had clung to in my darkest moments, they had brought me here, to this place of love and light. In the end, it wasn't the miracle of a cure that saved me. It was the miracle of grace, the miracle of being found when I was lost, and the miracle of love that never gave up, even when everything seemed broken beyond repair. And as my spirit soared, I knew that I was finally home.
Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Shrine of Lightness, and turn on notifications to keep receiving inspiring stories of faith. Together, let's open our hearts to the divine and witness the restoration comes from trusting in God.